Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. It is Wednesday, October 8th, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with U.S. Bureau Chief Jacob Magid. Hey, Jacob, how you doing?
Hey, Jessica. Good to be with you.
Good to have you here. We are in the intermediate days of Sukkot, and it is day 733 of the war. Jacob and I will talk about the latest in the ongoing hostage negotiations in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. We'll also talk about last night's gathering of some 30,000 people in Tel Aviv's Yarkon Park to mark 2 years since October 7th. So stay with us. Okay, Jacob. Beyond the headlines of Trump meeting with released hostage Idan Alexander and the family of murdered captive Omer Nutra, we have these ongoing talks, and people are certainly the hostages' families are waiting with bated breath to see what that yields and if their loved ones will be coming home, in theory, any day. Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, Ron Dermer. What are we hearing from Sharm el-Sheikh, from the Egyptian Red Sea resort? What do we think is in the offing for the next day or so?
Yeah, I like that you started by mentioning these meetings at the White House. Idan Alexander, the former American-Israeli hostage, who was released, I believe, in May, and Omer Nutra's family, who Omer Nutra is still being held, his body is still being held in Gaza. They visited the White House on Tuesday, and I think what the White House has tried to do, the Trump administration has tried to do with these meetings, is signal that this issue is at the top of their agenda right now. They obviously don't get a lot practically in terms of policy advancing the hostage issue in meeting with Idan Alexander, but it's more about sending more of a public signal that this is what they're focused on. And I think one of the interesting things that came out of it is that during Trump's meeting with Idan Alexander's family, according to a U.S. official I spoke with, the president told the family that the next 48 hours will be very critical in these talks that are taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh. So that's kind of the time frame that the U.S. is looking at. Now, he said will be critical. That doesn't mean that there'll be a deal within the next 48 hours, but my understanding, I guess, based off of that comment, is that we'll know a little bit more in 2 days or so. We'll know a bit more on Wednesday or Thursday about where things are heading. And that is because, as we're speaking, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff arrived in Sharm el-Sheikh, and they'll now be joining the talks that have been happening since Monday and Tuesday at a more technical level, slightly lower level, still relatively senior officials taking part, but none of the biggest guns possible. And now on Wednesday, it's not just going to be Witkoff and Kushner who are joining, but also Qatari Prime Minister, also the Turkish intelligence chief, the Egyptian intelligence chief, Ron Dermer. So everyone who's anyone will be there. You even had a rare interview from Hamas's, I guess, lead negotiator, Khalil al-Haya, who's also in Egypt. So really all the major players. And I guess what I understand is now is crunch time. What's happened on Monday and Tuesday has been what's called technical talks. My understanding is that they were focused on the maps, or mainly this one map that Trump published a couple days ago, made it sound like this is the final, there's take it or leave it map of where the IDF will be withdrawing to when ahead of the hostage release. But I think there actually were some negotiations to maybe tweak that a bit, because again, this was all these proposals that the U.S. has been making have been basically in coordination with the U.S., and therefore what the Arab mediators have argued is that you still need to allow Hamas to also have its conditions taken into account as well. So there's been some talk about the maps and then other remaining gaps that I guess the official Arab diplomats I spoke with and U.S. official were a little bit vague on what those were. But I guess once Witkoff and Kushner get there, I think it's going to be a little bit more bigger picture. And Hamas is looking to secure guarantees from the U.S. and the other international partners that Israel won't be able to resume the war once the hostages are released. Because now we're in a situation where they're willing to release all the hostages, give up all their leverage, but they want assurances that we won't see a repeat of the previous ceasefire in January, where Israel resumed fighting after the first phase of the deal. From what I hear speaking with Arab diplomats, there's not going to be some sort of written U.S. announcement saying we will never allow Israel to resume the war. They feel that that's not something that the U.S. is going to be willing to do, but there will be verbal assurances that that will be effectively what will happen, and that I guess the expectation is that that Hamas should just simply trust the U.S. I think and I talked about this a few days ago on the podcast. What these Arab mediators are trying to point to is that, look, now we're actually seeing Trump being willing to rein in Netanyahu, and the way that he handled the Qatar situation and getting Bibi to apologize, that maybe now you can trust Trump. I think it's going to be a difficult sell for these Arab mediators to make, given that Trump also is definitely known to kind of turn on a dime depending on the situation. But that's, I guess, they feel that they're in a better position to make the argument that the U.S. can be trusted to make sure that Israel doesn't resume the war. And if you look at some of the things that U.S. officials are saying, is that basically they do feel that Israel has accomplished enough at this point that it is at a position to end the war, at least in the way it's being fought now. Especially because even if, yes, Hamas is not going to be completely disarmed on day one, Israel's still in such a large part of the Gaza Strip, even after the hostages are released. Because if you look at this map, it's over a majority of the Strip, and I think that will be what they try to argue to Israel, is that yes, you might not get everything you want here, but given that you're still in so much control, that the Strip won't be the threat that you're concerned it becoming. And we will continue working towards, in subsequent negotiations, those thornier issues like demilitarization and disarming Hamas, which I think will come up a little bit on Wednesday or Thursday. But my understanding is that we're seeing ultimately a kind of similar approach to what the Biden administration did, which was first to focus on trying to get the hostages released and then focus on the thornier, more difficult issues afterwards. It seems to be that's what Trump's approach is as well, when he's talking about for the first time a couple days ago, talked about it as the first phase, which is the hostages release, and then those subsequent negotiations after. But given that even how difficult getting those hostages out is going to be, with the high demands that Hamas is going to be making in terms of which prisoners it wants to get released, there's plenty to work with even before you get to the issue of disarmament.
Jacob, I think you did refer to this also a couple of days ago, the fact that Hamas now sees the hostages as a type of liability, even that where at one time they didn't want to let them go because that was all they had, in a sense. That was all they could hold on to in any kind of negotiation. And now they've sort of turned on that idea. And could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the argument that was put to me by one of the Arab diplomats that I spoke with was just that the hostages, yes, they are a major source of leverage for Hamas, but because they're now becoming the main source of their criticism, and what the Arab mediating parties, be it Egypt or Qatar or Turkey, want to get this headache over with, they feel like the way to end the war is not by holding on to a certain amount of hostages so that Israel doesn't return, but actually giving up the hostages. They feel that that is the most effective way, and therefore they're putting extra pressure on on Hamas to start giving up those hostages rather than trying to release them in phases, which is what the Arab mediators have been pushing before. Given they felt that that was the only way to reach an end to the war, was to do this in phases. Now they're saying no, we want this all in one fell swoop. But obviously, I think it's a transition that Hamas is slowly getting behind, and we saw it in this statement that it issued last week that Trump got really excited about. But I think still, if they're going to do that, Hamas wants more ironclad guarantees. I thought that that was something that they had gotten before they had issued the statement last week, but I guess, speaking again to those involved in these negotiations, that it's actually something that they still haven't fully secured, and that's going to be discussed once Witkoff and Kushner are there. The other thing I was just going to point out is thinking or taking note of some of the things that Trump has been saying publicly over the past few days. He's very accessible to reporters. There was another White House Oval Office meeting with the visiting Canadian Prime Minister, so we took a bunch of questions on this on Tuesday. But he talked about the importance of, when he was asked about guarantees, he said he's going to make sure that both sides are held accountable. The day before, he was asked about a call that he held with Netanyahu last week, where Trump was very excited about Hamas's response, where it said it was willing to release all the hostages up front. And Netanyahu felt that the other parts of Hamas's response were an effective negation of Trump's proposal. Trump didn't see it that way and said to Netanyahu, according to an Axios report, "Why are you always being so effing negative?" Trump was asked about this in the Oval Office and said that didn't happen. I will say I spoke with a U.S. official who confirmed that report. And I do think
The original report.
the original report about what Trump had said, I think it's sometimes Trump has been more careful not to publicly criticize Netanyahu. Other times he's been less. But I think that was the strategy he took in this situation. But if you just go back, I think a few hours before this denial, Trump was sharing a story from the New York Times, which is also not something you see every day given his animosity towards the paper. But the story was about how angry Trump was after the Israeli strike in Doha and how that led him to, or his administration, to take this different approach to try and get this 20-point plan done and then bring about an end to the war. And there was another thing that the U.S. official I spoke with told me, which was that we feel that Netanyahu has fought very hard, that he's accomplished a lot on the battlefield, but that now is the time to bring about an end to the war. And I think that is the approach they're going to be taking in these talks as well, or at least I think that would be a hint to the approach they're going to be taking. And Trump has said this himself. That what this U.S. official told me too is that the longer this war goes on, the harder Israel's international standing is hit, and that therefore we think that the best way to improve it is to try to run with this deal. That's, I think, when you're looking at what Israel needs to do, which is, I guess, be more flexible. I'm sure there's going to be lots of pressure on Hamas as well, including from the U.S., and Trump has made several threats over the past few days. But it was interesting to hear him on Monday say that actually Hamas has been, quote unquote, fine as of late, and they're agreeing to certain things that they haven't before, and that right now we hope that that trend will continue, and we recognize that it's not just all these other countries that want an end to this war, but also the Israeli people. And Trump again refers to all the protests that have been happening in Israel, and recognizing the domestic situation that Netanyahu is in, where actually he's kind of in a minority position in Israel that's taken a much more hard line in these negotiations, as opposed to the majority of the public that is willing to, I think, accept Trump's proposal as is, or maybe even terms that are slightly less favorable to maybe what Netanyahu would want.
Yeah, definitely. Seeing that and hearing that all over the place, at least on the Israeli streets. Okay, let's take a quick break. When we're back, Jacob and I will talk about last night's memorial ceremony in Tel Aviv, so stay with us.
Let's flip the script here. I think you covered a little bit about some of the ceremonies that were happening yesterday to mark the 2-year anniversary of Hamas's October 7th attack. The main one in Tel Aviv is something that I think you were watching pretty closely. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. It's called Kumu, which means rise up. And that is the name that really marks one of the main founders, Yonatan Shamriz. He was from Kibbutz Kfar Aza. He was hiding in a safe room on October 7th with his pregnant wife and a toddler son. And his brother Alon Shamriz, was taken hostage, also from Kibbutz Kfar Aza, and was one of the 3 young men killed in December 2023 accidentally by IDF troops when they escaped from their captors. Anyway, Yonatan Shamriz put together Kumu along with other survivors and families of victims and hostages. They ran the largest memorial ceremony last year, and this year it is not the government ceremony. The government, which ran its own ceremony last year, which was highly debated, and there were many survivors and families of the killed and the deceased who did not want to attend that. The government basically has set a day of remembrance, which is the Hebrew date, 2 days after the Hebrew date. The Hebrew date is the holiday of Simchat Torah, and this year, this date falls out on October 16th. Anyway, back to the ceremony. It's an event that's in Tel Aviv's Yarkon Park, which is where all of Israel's major performances happen. Like a visiting performer, the Rolling Stones, Maroon 5, no, there's any of these kinds of events take place on the lawns of Parque Arcon. Similarly here, but much more sedate and sad and carefully orchestrated. So it basically was a combination of some of the biggest names in Israeli performers. I'm thinking of Eden Sasson and Yuval Raphael, who was Israel's Eurovision representative last year. Um, these singers would sing in between family members and released hostages who would speak very briefly in between each performance. There was a stage with a burned car, which represents, of course, the many cars that were burned by Hamas terrorists along the highways and fields on October 7th. It was surrounded by a field of red crown anemones, the flower of the Negev of the south, and 48 yellow chairs representing the remaining hostages, both living and dead, who are still in Gaza. And everyone spoke really about their experience. Someone like released hostage Omer Shem Tov, who was released in February, spoke about being a Nova survivor and what it has meant to him to be released and what he still needs. And he and so many others unable to go on, they need the other hostages home. That was really a message that was repeated over and over again. I'm speaking about a woman from Nir Oz whose mother, 80-year-old mother, and her own 13-year-old daughter with autism were killed on October 7th. And she talked about the release and the freedom that the Israeli people need. And then really most thoughtfully and forcefully were the remarks made by Yonatan Shamriz, the brother of Alon, the person who really put together Kumu, who spoke about October 7th as this day of remembrance, but really a day of remembrance of the negligence. He was one of the few people who spoke much more politically, in a sense. And he said that that the Israeli government really forgot the Israeli people and ignored them on October 7th. He made a promise. He said that he made himself a promise: we will rise. Kumu. Let me just quote him for a second. Our generation, which inherited a country bleeding, isolated, fractured, and in pain, will be the one to fix it. It will be the best version of Israel. Yonatan Shamriz is a young guy in his early 30s, one that sanctifies the lives of its residents and is built on truth, accountability, and mutual responsibility. We will bring back life. We will bring back hope. We have risen. The people of Israel have risen. And like so many others who were affected on October 7th, he started his remarks by saying, instead of good evening, he just said evening. Yonatan is someone who doesn't say good morning or good evening or good afternoon. He doesn't greet at the moment. He hasn't greeted for 2 years. He launches into what he has to say. And his words were greeted by the audience. They gave him a standing ovation. They first started applauding him, and then the entire audience of 30,000 people stood up and applauded him. And that was essentially the end of the evening last night. And Jacob, as you mentioned, there have been ceremonies throughout the South over the last 2 days, starting on Sunday, continuing into Monday and Tuesday. Today there is a very major ceremony at the Nova site in Kibbutz Re'im, where I'm sure there will be thousands of people, both from the public and the bereaved. President Herzog will be there as well. And that's where we are right now. I mean, that could easily continue for several days and then start up again at the end of the Sukkot holiday, as the government has its own sort of day of remembrance, and we'll see what that brings as well. I wanted to also mention one more thing, and that is this show Red Alert that was put together by Keshet, which is Israel's Channel 12, and was purchased by Paramount Plus, which is actually going to be started screening that on Tuesday in the US. And it's a scripted series of 4 episodes that is based on 4 intertwined stories of survivors of October 7th. And the producers created the show really working very closely with these four different survivor stories. I watched it over the course of several hours a couple of days ago, and it's just a strikingly, it's really just, it's riveting, it's stark, it's a very painful reminder of these stories that are probably very well known to many of us, but it's done very well with Israeli actors and with details that make it feel extremely real and remind us exactly of what happened on that day, on October 7th, 2 years ago. It's being shown in 4 different episodes on Israeli TV on Channel 12 through next week. And I can't say I heartily recommend it, but I would certainly say that if you have the opportunity to watch it, it's a way of marking this anniversary, this 2-year anniversary, and reminding us of why we are where we are right now, in a sense, what brought us to this moment.
Do you see that show being watched at a widespread level? Just given it's not like too many Israelis need a reminder of what happened on that day. Is it like we're so close to October 7th that actually people need space before they have TV shows that are reenacting that day?
I know what you mean. I would say that I watched it. I certainly opened that first episode with a bit of a feeling of dread, of what I was about to see. I certainly think that for Israelis, and this was an interesting remark that one of the producers made. She just was writing about it on Facebook. I haven't spoken to her yet. I hope to this week. She said that when they did the official screenings, the premiere in the town of Ofakim, where some of the episodes take place, that one of the a sister of one of the security forces who fought very intensively on that day. I don't know which one she was speaking of, but the sister got up and said, I never fully asked you. She never fully asked her brother what went on that day. And I think there's a lot of Israelis who mourn and think about hostages and and the victims, but don't necessarily know the details. And I think it's important to know the details. It helps flesh out this horrible, terrible thing that happened and to understand the protests and to understand the victims' families. Because even if, as going back to the beginning of this podcast, even if this deal comes through and the hostages come home and we find our way to some kind of imperfect, hopeful, better situation after these 2 years of war, I think we're still going to have all these bereaved people, all these survivors who will need our understanding in order for them to go on to some kind of better life. So yeah.
I was just thinking when you started talking about how they're kind of, again, we're in a scenario this year where there's two separate dates where this day is being memorialized, be it the English date on October 7th and the Hebrew calendar date, which will be at the end of on Simchat Torah. And I guess at first a part of me was wondering whether in Tel Aviv, given that the protest was there, we always like talking about who was there? Was it a diverse crowd because because this is the annual ceremony, so it's likely to be more diverse, but maybe not because it's Tel Aviv. And then I was just seeing how on Channel 14 they started their Motzei Chag Tuesday evening broadcast of the Patriots program, which is Yinon Magal, who is very pro Netanyahu. The network in general is seen as very pro Netanyahu. They started their Tuesday evening broadcast with singing of V'samachta b'chagecha, which is this festive song because there's this commandment on Sukkot to be happy and joyful and joyous. And I think that was this clip that the network even published on their Twitter was really ridiculed by, I think, more secular parts of the public who aren't as familiar with this commandment of you have to be happy on this holiday, and also just felt that this was, even if there is this commandment, it was really done insensitively, it seemed like kind of poking in the eye of Israelis who look at this day to be actually much more somber given what happened on October 7th, and that it was not necessarily about fulfilling a commandment, but trying to antagonize Israelis who on the right feel that the left has been antagonizing them. And I guess part of this healing process that's going to have to take place at some point is recognizing that these divisions are really quite wide. These gaps are quite wide right now.
I would say that, first of all, at the ceremony, which I was watching live streamed. I was not there. Our reporter Steve Leviton was there. But you looked at the audience and it was extremely mixed. You saw kippot, you saw religious people, you saw secular people. And as we always say, there are people who might be religiously observant and the men do not wear a kippah. So you never really know. But the audience was for sure mixed because, as we know, October 7th affected every kind of person. Remember, also the soldiers who were killed on October 7th and in Gaza afterwards were also memorialized. Representing different kinds of troops and situations, and some of them are from religious families and some of them not, and so you certainly saw that. I also know that just in here in Jerusalem, synagogue communities who were having Sukkot services yesterday, a lot of them went outside at 10 o'clock as a way of marking October 7th. I know in my Jerusalem synagogue, the whole synagogue went outside, over 100 people, in the middle of doing the joyful prayers of Hallel, and did the weekly. Every time we gather, there is a moment where we list all the remaining hostages, and that's what we did outside in order to sort of be with the larger community outside and other synagogue communities. And I know that in other synagogues that was the same feeling. It's this holiday, and Sukkot is a holiday that people want to be able to celebrate fully again. And yet it was October 7th. And everyone, that you spoke about waking up in the morning. And even though Israelis and observant Israelis tend to mark the Hebrew date, there is no getting around October 7th. And that was the feeling yesterday. It was Sukkot, and you want to enjoy it in some way, but you also are so aware of the calendar date and what date and what happened on this day. And in some ways, and that's the ongoing conversation. Do you feel it more on the Gregorian calendar, or do you feel it more on the Hebrew calendar? And you probably feel it on both. That's the truth. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad we got to talk about it. It does help. So, Jacob, thank you for the earlier part of the podcast and bringing us through where we are in hostage negotiations. And we are certainly here at the Times Visual hoping to hear more about it and hear some good news from it. So thanks.
Thanks, Jessica. Moadim l'simcha.
Chagim uzmanim l'sason. And thanks too for listening to the Times Visual's Daily Briefing. We'll be back again tomorrow with another installment. This episode is produced by the Podwaves. We'll be back again tomorrow. Thank you for listening. Take care and see you soon.